In 2023, a company worth $14 billion filed for bankruptcy. That company was Tupperware. What you are about to see is not a story about plastic containers. It is a story about what happens when a company mistakes its sales channel for its competitive advantage and watches the world change around it while it stands completely still. By the end of this, you will understand exactly why Tupperware died and which companies are making the same mistake right now. At its peak, Tupperware was not just a brand, it was a global institution. More people in certain countries could identify a Tupperware container than could name their own finance minister. The company operated on every inhabited continent. And then, in the span of a single decade, it went from $2.5 billion in revenue to nothing. The story starts in a small Massachusetts workshop in 1946. Earl Tupper was a self-taught chemist who had previously worked at DuPont, experimenting with polyethylene, a greasy, pliable plastic that most manufacturers treated as industrial waste. He saw something in it that no one else had bothered to look for. Tupper found a way to make polyethylene flexible, lightweight, and completely odor-free. More importantly, he engineered a lid that created a vacuum seal when pressed and released, what consumers would come call the burp. It was unlike any food storage solution that had ever existed. He took it to department stores. It failed completely. The problem was that the seal required a live demonstration to make sense. Customers in stores would pick up the container, push on the lid, not understand what they were feeling, and put it back. The product was revolutionary, but invisible on a shelf. Tupperware needed a stage. An unlikely candidate was about to build one. Brownie Wise was a single mother from Detroit who had figured out something the stores never could. If you showed someone the burp in person, if you pressed that lid and let them hear it, they bought on the spot. She began holding product demonstrations in living rooms. The results were immediate and extraordinary. Brownie Wise did not invent the home party concept, but she industrialized it. She convinced Earl Tupper in 1951 to pull Tupperware off every retail shelf in America and sell exclusively through in-home demonstrations. Every sale would flow through a network of independent sellers, mostly women working part-time, who earned commission and built their own downlines. The results were staggering. Within 5 years, Tupperware had more active sellers than most companies had customers. The model turned housewives into entrepreneurs at a time when women had almost no formal professional pathways available to them. For millions of women across the United States, the Tupperware party was their first experience of financial independence. From a pure business architecture perspective, the Tupperware model was close to perfect. There were no salespeople on salary. There were no advertising budgets to speak of. The company had outsourced its entire customer acquisition function and paid only on results. Word of mouth, manufactured at industrial scale through structured social events, was the entire engine. By the early 1980s, Tupperware had cracked one of the hardest problems in business: sustainable, low-cost customer acquisition through genuine human trust. The model had spread across Europe, Latin America, and Southeast Asia. Tupperware was no longer a product. It was a social infrastructure, and that was exactly where the danger was hiding. International expansion worked because the model was culturally portable. In India, Indonesia, and the Philippines, social gatherings were already central to daily life. A Tupperware party mapped directly onto existing rituals. By 2000, the company was generating more revenue in developing markets than it earned in the country that invented it. But back in America, something structural had already shifted. Between 1960 and 2000, female workforce participation nearly doubled. The suburban housewife who was available on a Tuesday afternoon to host a living room demonstration was becoming a statistical minority. Tupperware's core sales channel was quietly, steadily evaporating. This was not a sudden crisis. It was a slow-moving structural shift that any competent strategist could see in publicly available labor statistics. And Tupperware's response was to push harder into international markets, keep recruiting, and tell shareholders that America was a mature market rather than what it actually was, a warning. What makes Tupperware's decline so painful to study is that the options were not hidden. Amazon was reshaping consumer retail from 2005 onward. E-commerce penetration data was published quarterly. Every major strategy firm was advising consumer brands to build digital channels immediately. Tupperware's leadership read the same reports as everyone else. and then chose to wait. A digital Tupperware party was not a radical idea. It was an obvious one. The entire model was built on personal demonstration and social trust, both of which translated directly to YouTube tutorials, Instagram unboxings, and influencer recommendations. The company had one of the most recognized brand names in consumer goods. It simply lacked the leadership willing to use it differently. Three things ultimately destroyed Tupperware, and the first was the most fundamental. The company confused its model for its moat. The party was not the product, it was a distribution channel. And distribution channels have shelf lives. When leadership could not separate the two, every strategic decision became about protecting the party rather than protecting the customer. By 2015, recruiting new representatives had become structurally difficult. The average Tupperware seller in North America was over 50 years old. Younger women had careers, gig economy income, and social media. They were not looking to host product parties on weekday afternoons. The seller pipeline had not just slowed down. It had reversed. The revenue chart tells the story without commentary needed. A decade-long decline from the 2012 peak, briefly interrupted by a pandemic bump when consumers suddenly cared about food storage again. That 2021 recovery gave executives reason to declare the model was validated. 18 months later, they filed for bankruptcy protection in Delaware. The second killing force was debt. During the profitable years, Tupperware had taken on significant leverage to fund share buybacks and dividends, a common strategy to satisfy shareholders that leaves companies without financial flexibility when revenue turns. By 2022, the interest payments on that debt exceeded what the company was generating from operations. There was no room left to pivot anywhere. On September 18, 2023, Tupperware Brands Corporation filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy in Delaware. The brand that had once been synonymous with household organization, with women's economic independence, with the optimism of post-war American consumer culture, was insolvent with over $800 million in debt. None of the individual failures was catastrophic in isolation. What made Tupperware's collapse so complete was the compounding. Each year the company chose the familiar path. It narrowed the options available for the year that followed. Strategic inertia is not neutral. It is a slow erosion of possibility. By 2021, there were no good options remaining, only expensive ones. 3 lessons every company should extract from its failure. First, your sales channel is not your competitive advantage. Your product and your brand are. Second, brand trust is an asset that depreciates if you stop actively investing in it with new audiences. And third, that does not just cost money. It costs options. In business, options are the only thing that keeps you alive when the environment shifts. Grade the individual components, and Tupperware looks impressive on paper. The product worked. The brand was nearly unmatched. The original sales model was a masterpiece of applied human psychology. But execution of strategic adaptation, the single most important capability for a long-lived business, earned a failing grade at every critical decision point in the company's final 2 decades. Tupperware did not fail because its product stopped working. It failed because its leaders confused what they sold with how they sold it. The container was excellent. The community around it was real. But community needs to be tended. Trust needs to be renewed with each new generation. And the assumption that yesterday's model will carry you through tomorrow's market. That assumption has ended more companies than any competitor ever could. The container is still in kitchen cabinets around the world. The company that made it is not. What outlasts you is never what you built in the best years. It is whether you were willing to rebuild it when the world demanded something different.